we signed a space situation agreement in 2018. We signed a technology safeguard agreement in 2018. And we signed a cooperation on peaceful use of space agreement in 2018. I didn't see a single card saying we should do anything more. That's kind of what they want to do. They only really care about civilian cooperation from doing with them. There's no evidence they care about anything else. So I can't even think of any possible answer.
About Australia, similar, but not entirely. There are 3 areas for potential growth: military, or like national security questions, civilian cooperation or commercial cooperation. National security cooperation we already do a fair amount of, but it has still a China disad, but I don't think it's worth it because of the uniqueness direction. We don't do much in the area of commercial or civil co-op, but that's largely not due to the United States. There's like some barriers in Australia that prevent it from happening. And one thing that is interesting though is like there are potential to get all of the education about Australia, which does have a fair amount through the China topic, because a lot of our cooperation is inhibited because of our like the movement barriers.
New Zealand has a space agency. It was formed in April of 2016. They have very limited money and resources. It seems like the main thing that's happening right now is Rocket Lab is a joint company that launches some it's increasingly irregular but very still pretty infrequent launches for the U.S. military, and very generally the function of their space agency is just the government trying to set up a regulatory environment to encourage, commercial activity in space, but it's very, very small, very limited. I didn't see too much else similar for like expanding those efforts or any solvency advocates or disads. So not super right for debate.
I guess we're just gonna leave it.
I can do a list of randoms here. So Argentina, this was 2007, probably be pretty good. They signed an agreement with China that year. China started building a pretty secret space satellite stuff. I've sent Roberto Cards is a great solvency advocate in there from 2007 that says we should cooperate more with them to keep China from opening up a space station there. And there are some 2019 articles where Fowler, who is the Central Command Director, has said that they're very concerned that China is cheating in the Black Rock space station there, kind of listening in on what they're doing and that sort of stuff. But Argentina already signed an agreement with China. The only thing I could find in terms of solvency stuff was that, like Maggie, I think my conclusion is that Argentina is probably a pretty good advantage for greater Chinese cooperation on space, not an advocate for greater U.S. or Argentinian cooperation on space. There's nothing that says we need to cooperate more other than that 2007 article that says Argentina wants some help with their space infrastructure. We should beat China to the punch. Kind of seems like we got beat. If someone did want to look more into it and see if that article's been updated since 2007, I only did a little bit of it. Couldn't find a whole bunch of stuff there. So that was my thought on it. Let's see. I also did. Oh, the UAE. Actually possible, I guess. Like, they spend a crap ton of money on a pretty robust space program. They have debris monitoring going on. They have plans to go to Mars. There's a particular disad and that there's, huh?
Is there oil?
No, I mean, that's the big advantage is why they're developing space. Is they have a giant influx of cash, and space was a place where they can spend a lot of money to make big investments in the short term. I've included a couple of sites in the document that gets sent out that says that they're using it as an area for Arab unity. They've invited the other Arab countries to kind of come together to do some space cooperation in an area where they can make large investments to diversify their economy. There's a pretty good economic oil diversification advantage built around there. The problem's probably going to be the area we repeat everywhere. They have signed a memorandum of understanding with the United States that says that they're going to share their information and stuff in space about us. There's a NASA press release from 10/4 that says that the NASA and the UAE Space Agency just signed an implementing arrangement, which is stronger than an MOU that outlines cooperation across a range of areas related to exploration, space flight, debris management, further cooperation, agreement to discuss lunar exploration, involvement, stuff like that. So a surprising amount of UAE space literature, surprising amount of US space literature. There's a controversy in that the UAE is using it to diversify its economy and is kind of separated from NASA, and that it wants it sort of air of unity, but is doing a crap ton of collaboration. I did tell DCH and Brian that if there was a set of solvency stuff that I missed, maybe we could include it, but I don't know that we're going to be much change from the status quo.
Yeah, so for the maybe list, Kenya is a no. We have a joint monitoring station, but very little space activity. Mexico's program is very small, has an agreement with NASA. It's mostly focused on developing science infrastructure and human, for want of a better term, human capital. It doesn't have launch capabilities, outsources its satellite launches to the Japanese. Shockingly, nobody advocates the U.S. should do space cooperation with North Korea. South Korea, I found a couple of old solvency advocates. I didn't bother to cut them because they weren't really. So there's one from 2010 from the SW Foundation that says maybe we should think about it. It just says it's important to South Korea, might be good for cooperation, and then general cooperation stuff. We do have a broader NASA agreement in place, so uniqueness problems. Along with Dinger, I looked at Pakistan. Pakistan declared that it was going to have a person in space by 2022, although there doesn't seem to be a lot of initiative about that. I did find a couple of articles that were pretty good about a space arms race between India and Pakistan, and that being bad. But it seemed that the initiator of the arms racing activity were more China and India. China launches Pakistan satellites, but yeah, there's not a whole lot going on. And in searching for South Korea and Pakistan articles, I found two pretty good China articles, including one that makes fun of Facebook for friend requests, and then a good one that says the Chinese would say yes to space exploration.
If you friend request them.
If you friend request them.
This one's
I was just coughing.
I did the Canada stuff. There's like no linkediness for cooperation that is scientific, commercial, friendly, peaceful, etc. We do a bunch of stuff. For a moment, I thought there might have been a potential for cooperation on the Gateway, but that got funded in the spring. So even like past articles that have suggested that might have been necessary or good. There are like almost 50 agreements between the U.S. and Canada about space stuff. We do situational awareness. We do a bunch of stuff. Anything that would be on the peaceful side or civil side is probably done. There is some disagreement about weaponization, if that is an area of the topic that we want to include. They don't really like this whole Space Force idea. It might disrupt some of the ways that our cooperation that exists now would occur. And there is somebody who suggests that talking to Canada about what weaponization might look like in space could help set international norms for that, make it more peaceful than the U.S. sort of doing it without consultation or working with Canada. So I think that if we were to include Canada, it would need to be in a weaponization type topic, but the other stuff is not that. Or is already a thing, I guess.
I'm talking about China. It's a thing. It's actually could potentially be its own topic. So
That's good.
in the status quo, in 2011, the Wolf Amendment which is still in play, even though Wolf's no longer in Congress, severely restricts cooperation. There is some cooperation that takes place, but the basic arguments against cooperation with China are one, as we mentioned earlier, the PLA controls China's space program, so there's inherent dual use advantages they gain every time they co-op with us. And then the Wolf Amendment was passed because there was a history of espionage that the U.S. was concerned that trade secrets were being stolen. So those become negative ground. I'll talk about some other negative ground in a second. Anyway, Wolf Amendment still holds. The new person that came in after Wolf said, yeah, still a thing. However, there's some debate. It just requires, some people say it prohibits, but it doesn't. It just requires congressional approval in advance if NASA wants to cooperate. Some things have received that approval. So it is possible, but there's also good evidence that it stigmatizes. So it prevents people from even attempting to do cooperation. So you don't have to necessarily have evidence that says there was something proposed and got shot down. There's pretty good evidence on that. That's the core controversy. Is it possible to cooperate with an adversary? There's really good evidence that talks about that in both directions. Status of current cooperation is what I just described. There's some stuff going on. There's some good articles about affirmative proposals. So the question is whether it's topical to just repeal the Wolf Amendment. My guess is there will be teams that will attempt to do that. I found some evidence that says it would facilitate cooperation. I'm not sure if it counts as cooperation itself, so depending on how the resolution is worded. There's also relaxation of the Wolf Amendment. You don't have to repeal it. You can just specify areas of cooperation that are exempted. That means that's also potential counterclaim ground when you talk about negative ground, because if the affirmative repeals, then the negative ground relax as opposed to repeal. Cooperation on things like lunar exploration / colonization, a host of issues like debris, everything we've talked about before. The reason why is last year, China launched more than any other country or the EU. So China is doing more in space right now than anyone else. So any reason why space is a thing, China would be the country to cooperate with. There's a pretty good article that says U.S. needs to cooperate with China because right now it's sort of banking on its private sector to be able to hang, but it can't. And then a good article, I've sent all this to Danielle, but there's an article that references both how we can use previous maritime law to understand how space law needs to be developed, and it talks about cooperation with China as a form of constructive engagement. So even though they are an adversary, that's why we should cooperate with them. The net ground, which I mentioned earlier, there's defenders of the Wolf Amendment. China's a bunch of lying, cheating, espionagers. There's some hint that Sino-US co-op trades off with Russia co-op, right? The relax versus repeal Wolf Amendment. And then I didn't even look into like how Japan would feel about it or how India would feel about it. But
There are some cards that I found. One card I found, and it seems like there were probably others. China would say no, they're not interested in international cooperation because they're so far ahead of us right now that they have no need to cooperate with us, and also that we probably shouldn't cooperate with them because they're so opaque that it would be impossible for us to really be able to follow the money and figure out, or the investment and figure out what we're doing.
Yeah. I did see one reference to that thing about them saying no that was interesting. It was like a time window that said by 2022, they're going to have their act together and they're not going to need to cooperate with us. So the affirmative might have a window of opportunity like now is the key time to try to cooperate before they totally become self-sufficient.
The say no argument could go either way on that question.
So the point being that there's tons of articles that go a whole bunch of directions. There's a really rich literature. There's definitely divided ground.
A lot of the Wolf Amendment stuff that I found seemed to be like necessary but not sufficient
Yes.
as the act, right? You can't do very much on the act without repealing it, but it is in and of itself not international cooperation. So it is, it's a prerequisite.
Yeah. A good country to
We like
I did Russia. Sent out some stuff. Generically or kind of across the board, we do a lot of cooperation with Russia in space. A few examples, they fly our people to the ISS, which they also kind of help maintain. They have stated their support for the Lunar Gateway, which I talked about earlier. They have cooperation with the U.S. They've signed statements saying they want to cooperate with the U.S. in deep space exploration. The one place where there's actually a legal barrier, though, to U.S.-Russia space cooperation is in rocket components. The United States now has taken steps to prohibit the use of Russian rocket components, and after 2022 is not allowed to use them anymore. That's specifically the RD-180 and RD-181 rocket engines, which actually compete very directly with American aerospace manufacturers for being used in like the Atlas V rocket, which is what we use to do a whole bunch of stuff. So there's the one kind of area of novel changes, I think, would be in actually the legal barrier kind of area of things where, maybe the AF could relax restrictions on the use of Russia rocket components. There's good negative arguments about that restriction boosting American aerospace. There's also some really good cards that I included about the dependence on Russian components being kind of volatile and dangerous for the U.S. The card uses like crazy hyperbolic language about the U.S. losing its status as a global power if Russia kind of dangles the RD-180 over us, which they have done actually since that card was written. So there's that stuff. I think that lends itself to either the, like I said, legal barriers resolution, or if we make one resolution that's kind of more about launches, then that could maybe be a country as well, because if all of the space activities on that resolution required like rocket launches, then this just prohibition would have to be resolved in some way. As for kind of some other things, the one interesting DA idea is like the reverse of the trade-off advantage, and I think this goes beyond Russia. It's just like there's a lot of cards that Russia will cooperate with China if the United States does not make an offer. We could say that Russia-China space cooperation is good for any number of reasons. That's especially nice because it says that the offer is kind of what they're waiting for. And so there's, that if we end up going with that wording, that's something that I could say. I didn't cut cards that Russia-China space co-op is good. I just cut the link cards.
Excellent.
Then there's also some norm stuff, which we talked about earlier. Just like we don't really have a guiding set of norms. I didn't cut a ton of cards about this because I didn't get to it, but I think we know that at least there's kind of a uniqueness argument. There's a lot more that can be done. I didn't find a ton of proposals, but I can look into that more. But definitely would include, but I think we should be careful because we don't want to put it on resolutions that have a lot of space activities where we're already heavily doing stuff with Russia now.
I'm sorry, could you say that last one again?
Yeah, sorry. I just think that there's definitely resolutions and sets of space activities that are very compatible with Russia. There's some that are not.
Okay.
And we should just be careful when we're kind of working on the individual ones.
So the generic, the U.S. should increase international cooperation with one of the more of the following. You not include Russia on that.
Well, if there's no list of activities, absolutely
Yeah,
not.
that's fine.
Yeah. And then there's even some, like if we listed specific things, I'd be concerned.
Which I think an ass saying the U.S. won't pull out of the space station, really kind of like a pro-Russia ass.
Like the U.S. won't pull out of the ISS.
Yeah. Well, Trump pretty much says he's gonna pull the plug on it like in a couple of years.
I don't know how I feel about the AF getting to be not pulling out of that. Is that just like increased commitment to the ISS?
Hard to do to make the there.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't personally want that app to be topical for other reasons. But I mean, theoretically, yeah.
There's actually evidence about how you spend money on it in the future and those sort of things. There's a potential DA,
Yeah.
I'm saying.
Cool. We did India.
Sorry, can I?
Yeah.
Sorry. So is the Grossman card the solvency advocate for the Russia app? Is there another one for me?
I was a little light on solvency advocates. The Grossman one is one, and then there's a lot of other articles that recommend getting rid of that prohibition. That's just kind of one that fell into the AF category. And yeah, but I promise, there are cards that recommend removing that restriction.
Okay, so India, it actually sounds very similar to Canada. We do basically every level of space cooperation with India currently. from information sharing to moon initiatives to human spaceflight initiatives to military cooperation. So any resolution that includes India should be very careful. That being said, there's two controversy areas where India probably fits in, and that's in space weaponization and norms creation. Recently, India in March launched ASAT test, which was the first making it the fourth country to have ASAT capabilities, which has created a lot of new articles and literature about the potential future of ASAT and space races in the region. So there's a lot of literature about how that affects their relations with other countries like Pakistan, China, Russia, and their future relations there. There's also there's also literature on how that affects non-proliferation in the future and other potential advantages. There's multiple different solvency advocates for that. There's an author who writes about how it should be done through TCBMs or generic ILAW, who goes through specific treaties like the Paros Treaty. So there's a lot of different mechanisms for including India there. And then the second component of that is that's also raised questions about debris in space and the future of how we manage that. And there's a Rose 19 card that talks about how we could create future norms for negotiating debris and how it gets removed and launching new weapons into space. So probably the best place India fits in there is in either a norms topic or a space weaponization debris topic. In terms of neg ground for India, most of it, there's a bunch of generic stuff that would apply to the weaponization in general, but a lot of the disads about weaponization can be made very specific to India. There's a lot of deterrence literature about how it affects about how ASAT capabilities and developing further affects their deterrence relationship towards China and whether that's good or bad or not. There's also literature that says that continuing India capabilities actually might spur further international action, which gives a good deterrence case argument. There's more weapons system stuff. And then there's also literature about how India's space weapons capabilities allows them to become kind of a space power, increases their hard power and space power, gives them more bargaining power in future treaties and agreements, which could be another place to get negative ground on. So bottom line is India should probably be included, but only in resolutions that are very narrowed to weaponization and debris removal.
There was also one thing that I think you had it that I saw. Japan can do a lot of like regional cooperation with India, which can like destroy all of the tiny research apps that like codify the status quo. There's an article there that's like goes down all the different things, capabilities that Japan has, and all of those can just easily take out any of the like India needs a partner doing X apps.
So just like an international counterpart of Japan doing.
Just have Japan do a thing with India. I mean, they'd have to.
It's cheating, but yeah. I don't know.
They haven't learned yet.
I did Taiwan. I don't think it's a thing. The U.S. and Taiwan engage in a lot of cooperation over satellite launches right now. The U.S. puts up all of Taiwan satellites. There were articles about a year ago when Taiwan was trying to launch its the Formsat 7, which is its most recent weather satellite. But it's because it wasn't getting scheduled to launch. It was sitting on their port waiting to get exported to the U.S. to launch. It's supposed to actually go up in June, which means that there'll be some cooperation there. The president of Taiwan ended up visiting NASA Houston, which was a big deal for a little while. There was lots of discussion last year as to whether or not that visit should actually occur. There's not so much discussion about means for future cooperation other than Taiwan wants to cooperate in other areas, like eventually putting satellites around the moon or landing a satellite on the moon. But there's no evidence that says the U.S. should help them out in that regard, or shouldn't help them out in that regard. So I don't think that it would be a very good form of the topic. And then I think that I just included some other articles there that are like, these are the things that the U.S. should do with Taiwan to improve our cooperation, and space is not existent in any of those articles. So.
I did Saudi Arabia. I didn't find anything that even close to resembles a solvency card. I also did some Cuba stuff. There were like a few solvency cards. They're pretty meh. It's basically just like, if we don't do it, there are some people who say that Russia and or China might. So there's sphere of influence advantages in DAs, but there was like 7-8 total cards. Not robust year of debate.
As DCH mentioned, I was working on Pakistan. I had him look just to verify that there was nothing there. There's nothing that calls for U.S. cooperating with Pakistan. Although I was surprised about that, but I guess we don't have very good relations with them. Because of that, then I started to look at like things like Peru and Argentina. I did find a couple cards talking about how the U.S. should get involved there in space because China's using that. That are relatively recent. I know there's that 2007 card, so I'll send them out. So there could be a thing. I'm leery about just kind of saying Latin America and that. I mean, it does mention Argentina and some of these others like Venezuela that you might look into. So I put it in a probably not. But for example, there's evidence that says that their space cooperation would help China get buy-in to kind of connect OBOR or BRI, whatever you want to call it, to Latin America. And so there might be some unique advantages and disadvantages, even though China has done a lot in Latin America.
Europe, there wasn't really anything particularly interesting, except for one particular area, which is this argument about Chinese influence. So I don't think that it's a viable affirmative or viable area for the resolution just because of the uniqueness issues on nearly every single element, including militarization. Actually, we're pretty much on the same page there. However, I think we can resolve the interesting argument about Chinese sphere of influence by just making that a vantage ground for like a China app. I think it's very interesting, and there's a ton of robust literature there, so we certainly think it's interesting and educational debate to be had, and not one that can be out there. It's not like a complete wash. There are some, at least rhetorically, some pushes for why the U.S., EU, or ESA relationship has changed in recent years, mainly because of the directives, Space Force type deal in the past kind of month, 2 months. There's a good bit of research out there that the relationship is changing, but I don't feel confident enough to claim that for the next year it'll change substantially enough to support future debate.
I would put Japan in a similar category. We just announced we're going to move to Japan. You all have Google News, you know that. We do military stuff now. I think that the only linking it is a huge problem for the negative. There are certainly some that hits, but who cares? I can't personally say. I think that the only version of, the only argument for including Japan would be if there were to be a militarization version, I think, of the resolution. Even then, I would worry a little bit about the DA because I think that the linking is still not very good, but
Just get Japan, just
just
They do add
dropping
almost
as hard as we
everything.
possibly can. Just as hard as we can.
They really don't want those out there.
No, yeah. We take about South Africa next, yeah. And Africa, actually. So it's in South Africa, we're chatting, and there are other African countries too, surprise, that have, some of them have space programs, Nigeria, Egypt, etc. But the African Union just created the African Space Agency. So that kind of came out a little bit early last year. They're doing some stuff this year. So in terms of co-op between the U.S., now it's very limited between U.S. and South Africa. There's no memorandum of understanding even. So it's basically just like, if you wanted to consider this space co-op, we do small things with like universities, essentially. That's the only thing I get talked about. It's like, so, we go over there and chat with their folks that have universities they call here. So not really like a lot of cooperation either between the United States and the various countries or between the United States and the African Space Agency specifically. Not a ton of solvency evidence that I found. A few here and there. They're kind of like, we need some co-op. They need partners. They're looking for partners. They'll take partners wherever they fit them. The U.S. is not really interested in partnering with our African space friends at the moment. It seems like there's some like tech concerns, etc. I didn't find like a A+ link card on that though, so there might be other concerns as well. It's hard to find. As far as African Space Agency cooperation, they tend to cooperate more heavily with other international actors at the moment. The EU, also China. mostly China actually. They're kind of underwriting a lot of satellite development for the African Space Agency. For solvent statements, again, I found some good stuff. It's kind of like they're really looking for partners. They're looking to cooperate, and they're kind of like first available opportunities they will partner. Nothing from like the U.S. side, but like Africa would be a particularly attractive partner from the United States' perspective, I suppose, to get involved with. They just don't have a lot of infrastructure. They're not like technologically sophisticated in terms of like the space programs. It's mostly like for homegrown tech development, which I guess the U.S. has not really been in the business of for a while. We don't tend to support others' space programs. We tend to support our own space program and then, I guess, take advantage of other space programs, which is sort of the DA. There would be a controversy, actually, which is if the United States did get involved, it would crowd out other, developers, China specifically, who's developing satellite infrastructure for 5G, which would both be a DA and an advantage. If China doesn't get its 5G network off the ground, then the U.S. and China might not fight a big war, or might fight a big war. Either way, go either way, really. And so there's some cards about that. Chinese investment in Africa is pushing for 5G, their satellite development, et cetera, is useful for that. But then also on the flip side of it, the Chinese investment's a little bit better than the United States because it can solve African economic development and avoid brain drain, just because most of the scientists that get involved with the Chinese don't go to China because their visa standards are different than the United States. So I guess if we even go up too much, then maybe we would just steal all the Africans' knowledge, bring it over to the United States, like the UDA. I mean, I don't know. It may or may not be that exciting, but it's there. There's a controversy. There's linked UQ for DAs, which makes it somewhat viable more than a few other areas. And then last thing I'll mention too, and Shanti, of course, you've got, I got one card on Afrofuturism. There are others, lots and lots and lots of them. I could have got cards the whole time on Afrofuturism if I wanted to. The lid is good. The lid is deep. It talks about the ways that we approach Western cosmology, kind of hegemonic construction of knowledge, space, time, coordination, and how we understand the construction of the world. So if there may or may not be a critical app running around in one of these different areas, but the solvency evidence for the critical app portion would be very good. A+ on this. I would put the policy solvency evidence in the kind of like B, B+ range, but a lot harder. And then I would put the kind of like policy controversy in a similar route, like kind of like maybe a B, right? B+. Like China, US involved, Africa, China soft power, 5G, or maybe not, right? Brain drain, so.
The only thing I'll add to that is that there's some literature about there needing to be Earth orbit satellites for them to be able to detect climate change and the impacts of that. But none of the literature speaks to the U.S. being key to that. It just says that developed nations need to offer money and technical, or knowledge and technical expertise to make those things happen. So that's the only addition, but there's a ton of literature on the Afrofuturism debate, which obviously will be an app regardless of the country. So.
It did seem like the sort of just funding counterplan, and this might be something to talk about with other areas too, that depending on the STEM that we have, the app would, I think, have a tough time to just like, don't cooperate, but just give them money, right? Counterplan, I don't know if that's competitive, then the app is just like, hey, like they kind of need some satellites and some money to just like get their satellites up in orbit to see what's going on and like monitor for poaching and like geosynchronous, climate impacts. If we're just like, we'll just fund that, but like we're not going to cooperate with you. You like stealing our tech. We got to solve that app. So I'm a little worried about the policy apps here, but I don't know. I would say if we're looking for things to add to some resolutions that only have one or two countries done, the recommendation here though would be, I think, African Space Agency. Right. Yeah. Okay. We talked about that. Yeah. Not like list South Africa, Egypt, Nigeria, etc.
What countries are part of it?
So it seems like it's a Pan-African development, which is organized through the African Union, and they're basically housed in Egypt at the moment because Egypt is kind of like has the most stable scientific and technical capacities. But South Africa and Nigeria are also significant partners, and then Ethiopia is like kind of doing some satellite development at the moment. So
Would the app be able to choose like specific countries in that, or was
I mean,
it's just like the
way
whole
that
organization is usually how it
yeah, the way
works?
the African Space Agency is organized, in my understanding, and I can just organize, you can do some more vetting if it ultimately gets involved in some resolutions. The way that it seems to be organized is that it's like the AU, the African Union, kind of like votes on its priorities, it votes on its location. You couldn't be like, hey, Ethiopia, we want to work with you on the African Space Agency. I think Ethiopia would be like, yeah, well, we can like vote, but we only have one vote. So like the AU might just overrule us on this. Because it's like, they don't control the African Space Agency. The ASA is controlled by the African Union. And that organization kind of like determines its priorities, et cetera. And yeah, right now their priorities are kind of like satellite deployment and data, which is why they're partnered so heavily with China, because it works well with like 5G deployments, because China's like, oh, we'll give you some satellites because we want to get access to your kind of like IP and just like control Africa. It's kind of like Chinese soft power, basically, to economic development, et cetera.
And there's some literature about why being able to launch near the equator is a lot better than being able to launch from other places around the world, because it allows quicker launching. So there's that too for anyone that might want to potentially think about
South America's got a lot of
I guess it could be US key warrant there too.
Yeah, exactly.
There could be US key warrant there, which is like, yeah, create a memorandum of understanding or something to like get launch access. Yeah.
I can read. Stupak sent me his Israel cards before he read, and they're in the thing if anyone wants to read them. But not to repeat the same thing, but we have a memorandum of understanding with Israel. We do a ton of cooperation now. We just said that we're going to expand and do like 20 more projects. In fact, Trump talked about it in March. Ted Cruz and Bill Nelson just went to Israel and met with the Israel Space Agency. And they're like, we should do some more stuff. They're like, yeah, sounds good. Let's go to Mars.
Yeah, link YouTube.
They'll say yes.
Oh, they definitely say yes. We don't need to put offer in the resolution.
Okay, so did we skip anyone else?
Yeah.
Ron.
Okay, well, the place where I think we definitely agree is there's no space cooperation happening with Iran now. It is a pretty dramatic departure from the status quo. I think the big thing is my read of it was since there is so little there are not a very large number of advocates that make the kind of case for change. I think I read the kind of quality of those advocates as being maybe like a little bit higher, although admittedly it is just, I think, one very good recent proposal. I kind of went in with the same concern, which is like post-withdrawing from the Iran nuclear deal, how much stuff are they really willing to say yes to?
Time out for 1 second. Brian has a document that replaced the earlier document. It's called Wording Something Something Iran, and then I had one that's called Iran. So if you're looking for them in the Dropbox, they're in 2 different vicinities.
So yeah, the stuff I'm working with is under the wording paper I see with Iran. The primary things that Iran wants to cooperate with the US on are, one, its launch capabilities suck, and they need a lot of help with that, especially because they're especially interested in doing things like environmental monitoring and stuff on their own. They're also making a pretty strong kind of push for US just kind of technical expertise and things like that. Beyond that and beyond kind of technical confidence building measures, there's not a whole lot on the app side. But I was surprised at what I thought was the quality of the stuff saying that they would say yes and that they would be willing to make changes. And for example, their ability to kind of launch missiles beyond 2,000 kilometers in exchange for kind of space cooperation. That also kind of forms the basis of the NIG, which I think, to me, out of all of them, I feel maybe the most comfortable being NIG against Iran, not just because of kind of uniqueness concerns, because the primary reason we don't cooperate with Iran on things like their space launch capability is because it's just as easy to use that with an ICBM. A lot of people say you would basically be funding Iran's kind of missile program. Israel is really not super happy about that. Iranian hardliners aren't super happy about that. Russia, who is currently Iran's real only backer, and Iran it probably not be super happy about that. There's, I think, good stuff for international agent counterplans and some kind of areas of privatization, but I also think there are some looming concerns. The biggest being there are just not a whole lot of apps. Like I think there is some good recent stuff, but just certainly not a bunch. I think the next stuff, again, gets somewhere surprisingly good. There are some things that are unique, like Israel, or there are some things like, so I do think there are some creative native things on Iran that don't exist elsewhere. There are not a lot of, I'd say, kind of recent solvency advocates, but I do think there's some good stuff. The best being that one that's labeled on our launches, that Thielman card, which Dinger found. Props to Dinger. Yeah, so I think I'm kind of leaning towards yes inclusion, primarily just because I think my main concern is how great are the apps, which is something I think app teams can kind of choose whether to, address. But
I'm leaning not include because I think a few things. One, while the Thielman article is surprisingly pretty good, it is the only article post withdrawal from the JCPOA, assumes the Trump presidency, takes into account that we were making fun of and trashing their space program in January, that we've recently reiterated threats to sabotage their space program by putting junk in the supply chains that would cause their launches to fail. That is the only article about it. My concern is that the AF has an advantage then because it is the most recent article and only article on this subject. None of the negative is particularly written in the context of Thielman's particular proposal. And so I feel like the AF gets up with the one article that's specific about the AF and says, oh, but our article says we solve. And the neg, I think the neg's good. I think the problem is none of the neg is written in the context of this particular proposal. We have to spin all the neg. So also, I didn't realize this Thielman card existed until just before dinner came. So I'm shifting. I was a hard no until I saw that card. Now I'm somewhat sympathetic, but I'd like to look at it a little bit more tonight.
And I'd be perfectly happy with just tabling any final thing. The only thing I'd say, and this is not to like no, it has to be there. I feel like I kind of read the Thielman thing as like an extension of what seems like the core proposal, which is if we're going to help them with something that boosts their launch capability, we have to have assurances that they have restrictions on the range of their missile program that don't go beyond 2,000 kilometers. The thing that I think is okay is it seems like Iran may already, and this maybe kind of cuts the other way on like the good recent neg uniqueness stuff. There is good stuff that says Iran feels like they're already doing that because they're still abiding by the terms of the JCPOA with Europe, or at least they're claiming to. And so there is good stuff that says maybe they'd be down to kind of go that way and things like that. I do feel like a lot of the kind of neg stuff for just getting them to change their kind of missile program would still be applicable. But, admittedly, this maybe cuts the other way. Like maybe Thielman is so specific that people could just write that in a really small and technical way. So, yeah. So we kind of on maybe and then maybe.
That's what I think. And also I think other people should take a look and write at the stuff that we did, process it a little more.
Was Turkey on the list? Did I miss that?
And Turkey was on the list, but I added it late because it popped up in one of the UAE things, but I just didn't do much more than find one article. I'm happy to add to it. My takeaway is that they just started a space program.
It's a delegation, yes, no.
Well, they're interested in really an ally, but not an
Okay, so
ally.
Where are we with countries then?
Yes, include is just
Yeah,
China.
yes. Oh my! Obviously, we should be debating about this country, China.
That's it.
Any disagreements?
Let's go with that.
Next part.
Babies?
Maybes or anything else? And we should figure out a way to make sure it's in every resolution.
I didn't hear anyone say that about me.
Am I hearing? I'll push for a China-only resolution.
Yeah.
Sure.
You can do reduced barriers with China. That's the nice thing about China. And you negative state action.
Thank you, Will. All right, maybes. I kind of typed it up there.
Might be too low.
We still have Russia and India in the maybe category, right?
We said both those were limited to space mill topics, right?
No.
No.
Yeah, Russia can be.
Japan and India.
That's
are
yeah.
space.
Oh, Japan and India were space mill.
Yeah.
Russia can be
I
legal.
read those cards. I disagree with that assessment on India, but I just wrote more. Like, there's definitely some advocates for doing, like, your first card is like, we should do more commercial stuff with India. We should do more scientific stuff with India. I mean, I know it has link unique problems.
Yeah.
But
I agree, like there are solvency advocates for those. My just concern is like we do like an overwhelming number of those kind of things already.
And there's like,
And like
One thing about this though, it's gonna be pretty tough to find countries that have excellent solvency advocates and excellent link uniqueness. I kind of think zero of those will exist.
China.
China.
Yeah.
We found the one.
We got one, but in the other maybe categories, it's like
Or
A plus solvency. Yeah, put in A plus solvency advocates, but A plus link UQ, and just kind of like people aren't writing about it.
Weaponized.
I think if you got space is like, there's the commercial aspect, which doesn't have as good link uniqueness stuff, but then there's also like the national security aspect that's good on both sides, it seems like. And then there's like civilian stuff, which is like the spending PA is kind of.
I'm gonna voice the concern that if we only have one country that seems an obvious one on the list, then perhaps the idea of a country list is problematic. We started with, we should have a country list, but we've now done research and we don't have anybody willing to advocate more than one country.
Well, I think that the benefit of the country list is like the specific areas.
well, yeah, if we narrow it and we decide we want China or maybe like China, like maybe plus 2 more, then we can find the mechanisms that align best with those.
Isn't the
So it's still helpful.
This is also just preliminary. Like, I'm unwilling to take on faith everything that was just said here.
Fair
We need to like,
Yeah,
we need
fair.
to take a look at some of
Yeah,
this stuff.
okay, cool.
Yeah.
Okay, well then, yeah, I'm willing to challenge the earlier one that says, no, nothing else is a yes then.
And I also want to, because like, I read Johnny stuff because
Yeah.
he sent them to me, and there are 3 cards. If it's in the topic, it'll be our AF. It shouldn't be in the topic. Because like,
I didn't-
it's just like we're doing 20 things with Israel, and the last line of the card is like, and we should find a new thing to do with them too, because they're Israel, and it always makes them happy. And that's literally why Cruz and Nelson went over there, was to find out, hey, Israel, what else can we do to make sure that you all are extra happy?
It's a great app.
It's a great app. But I don't think it should be in the resolution. Happier Israel. Anything else in the maybes, or we want more cards?
You listed all the maybes there.
I did, but that was mine. I just want to make sure people agree.
It seems like we had like
Yeah, I think Iran. Yeah.
Iran. It sounded like the African Space Agency.
Yeah, the
was
African
a-
Space Agency.
I have that one.
Yeah, I put that in the strong.
Did we group those? I'm sorry, I missed
They
that.
are grouped, yes, it's African Space Agency. That would
Not
be-
South Africa. That would be a.
Yeah. Yeah. Our recommendation is either African Space Agency or basically nothing. Yeah. Like, otherwise it's too small, it's too ad hoc, not solvency advocates for singular countries, yeah.
Does it matter if it is like should increase cooperation with list of countries or space agency?
It wouldn't matter, no.
Okay.
Yeah. In fact, we could, and that's one other discussion to have, is we could pick the space agencies that are relevant from the other countries if we wanted to.
Okay.
And then
So-
we can hear the military about that.
Yeah, exactly. It would be a more narrowing understanding of the resolution, but we could do like Roscosmos, Cosmos, Russia, or, it's like. then you
China's
could-
would still be military.
Yeah, but then it's like you could limit out commercial development, because you have to work with that specific agency.
So you like name the
Yeah,
agencies
just
instead of the
name
names of
agencies,
the
yeah.
countries.
Yeah, like Roscosmos. Then we could kind of plan to work with other entities within those countries, but just, it's like.
Got it. Okay, so don't want to take the maybes on faith. What?
We might cross up China later.
I'll take China on faith.
Yeah, I'll take China. I've seen the China cards. They're okay.
That's not a
Any no's that
Sorry, I just have one question because we did have a few under the category of maybe if militarization.
Yeah.
Are those still maybes or is that?
Good, still maybe.
I'd be trepidatious to add Japan just because the cards that I found about like a disad regarding either like increasing or decreasing space mobile technologies mentioned some technologies that Japan or us or we were already developing with them. So the link uniqueness problems creep back.
We're doing everything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is militarization.
Yeah, it's interesting if it's a militarization topic, we have allies listed.
Yeah.
Which makes sense. In a sense, it's like, it's a totally different topic to have an ally militarization topic than an adversary.
Australia's
weaponization.
Which makes it
I'm also not certain that Europe is like a yes in militarization. I didn't do a ton of.
Yeah, I just,
looking into this.
Yeah.
No, I got you.
It's like,
But what I did
in a way, it's almost like Russia, China is a better militarization.
They're like,
Well,
there's no.
Yeah,
militarization was weaponization.
And Grim, why are we? Didn't you said India only?
How come there's no
militarization?
Yeah,
support for
but
the
he didn't
for
disagree.
the weather
Yeah.
coverage for the space station? That was in the top of paper. That's like one of the biggest issues on U.S.
I heard
promoting
it's like
cooperation.
something, I
It's like,
guess.
I mean, the last
whether
two
we should
parts I
stay
saw
with the
this out
space
did
station
are
or
like
pull
we
the
should
plug on
develop
it. Or we like, we
norms
just
for
seem to
like
be ignoring
degree
that
from
issue.
PSATs.
Because right now
PSATs
it's
and the
a
first
step
one's
of
like
future
military cooperation and
decrease.
race sets, and there's like
What is the
paragraph that's like we can do commercial co-op, which it sounds like that. It sounds like
we need to bolster our
Whatever.
commitment to the space station?
There are tons of cards saying we should like yank.
We could extend it, because we have, there's a
Right, stop
sunset.
of future decrease is different than
Increased commitment.
reduction, increased commitment. Is there an advocate for increased commitment?
I bet I could find one.
Okay, that's what I'm saying. You might guess.
I'm working.
I'm not disagreeing that it's probably something pertinent to talk about, it just hasn't, nobody's fleshed it out.
I mean, I emailed the people who wrote the topic paper and like, you know, there, you do have this section of your paper that's like, here's some multilateral things that don't fit at all with any of the resolutions. What's your suggestion for that? And I think it was Caitlin, maybe Callahan, that just responded with, well, you can throw multilateral cooperation into the resolution to get that. So that was literally the only response that I got to them, and I've done nothing more with that. So
You could do these countries or any other country.
Yeah. So it'd be like,
With
at
combination of.
Floor, not a ceiling.
Yeah.
and then
Increase
the
At least these three countries.
increase international space cooperation with these countries.
With at least one or more of the following countries.
At least including a country.
Do whatever you want. But,
That at least does this, yeah.
that's fine.
That's not a paragraph
I'm
long.
saying
Great.
that you have to increase space co-op with a country that has.
Okay, let's talk about our assignments for tonight, things we want to get done, and the agenda for tomorrow.
I think there's some like lingering resolution possibilities we haven't explored yet. There's reduced barriers.
Hey, Brian?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's like, but we definitely, it's gotta be on the list, thanks.
Or on the roof.
Defining areas and types of cooperation.
Yes.
We did that. No, I mean, you already had
I
it.
know,
That's
I know
good.
you meant,
That's
I
good
know you
idea.
meant.
What do you mean? I don't know.
So we cooperate in space science, we cooperate in Earth monitoring, we cooperate in launching people into space. If folks want more than China, it seems to be a way to make the topic smaller. Exploration and development, but
Gotcha.
The like high school work.
yeah.
Do we need work on the beyond the Earth's mesosphere or other version of that?
Orbits, atmosphere, yeah, orbits or atmosphere.
Because they didn't want to say space, but.
Also, there's like multiple mesospheres
Multiple
layers of
layers.
mesosphere. There's just like
Yeah, I think using that UN list of here's the areas that everybody assigns cooperation to.
What else would we like to see?
Russia needs more solvency.
These trades can destroy Russia. We want to think a little bit more about it.
Well, some of these maybes, I think, just needed more research, like the Latin America.
What were they?
Russia, India, UAE, Peru, Argentina, Australia.
Look up.
Russia, India, UAE, Argentina, Peru, African Space Agency, Iran, and then it says if militarization, Europe, Japan, Canada.
I think
What?
this is just a militarization comment. I think those are only applicable if militarization or slash weaponization. I think Russia and China are like great for weaponization comment.
Well, I think that's not taking what people said for as truth. So all that needs work still.
What else do we want for Russia and India in particular? They were the top paper. I would like to give them as much attention as possible.
For India, it would seem to be figuring out where the division of ground is and the concerns that's being expressed as link uniqueness. So what, is there something that we're not currently doing that you could force the AF to do? Is there a type, the theme to the cooperation that's happening now? And so you would request the affirmative to do a different type of cooperation?
I mean, they just did that ASAP thing. That might provide, if we continue to cooperate with them or do it in other ways.
We restarted all cooperation after like.
Is there not a Pakistan DSAD to?
There is to the ASAT stuff.
To the ASAT stuff. Okay.
There is
Would
maybe
be
to
more
the
like a
broader quad.
Pakistan advantage because the AF would be like reducing India's military stuff, be like arms control style.
Maybe.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
kind of.
Yeah, if it's like this,
India military.
we give you stuff.
If it's like we give you lots of tech that can help your
Pakistan will
missiles,
not-
Pakistan would freak out.
I think my read of the India stuff after I didn't cut cards and after reading their stuff is like it's very clear militarization is kind of the direction we want to go, but like the direction of militarization.
There's one solvency article that I have that advocates the U.S. should share satellite technology with India, Singapore, and other countries in the Southeast Asia to deter China from invading the scrap yards. It mentions India, but also mentions other countries like Singapore and other allies.
For the rest of this, what I just categorized in the smaller navies, what cards would we need to take Australia from to more likely to be included on any resolution? On the pop it up.
The reason there are lots of solvency advocates out there for Australia,
Yeah.
but the best part of the controversy doesn't have great link uniqueness for the militarization cooperation stuff, but it does have the China dissent. Like, I don't know how much needs to be done, honestly.
That's how we feel about that.
I my read was that if we're including Australia at that point, it's kind of redundant given other better country opportunities.
Okay.
And that's why I stopped doing research, but if that's.
Gotcha. So, yeah, that was my thinking on Argentina. I remember us agreeing now that Argentina, you can talk about it through China.
How is that the case? Just because we cooperate with China doesn't mean we stop cooperating with Latin America.
All of those cards from 07 are like, if we don't cooperate, China's going to get there. All of the cards from 19 are brand new testimonial from military people are like, China just opened up this space base
Yeah.
in Argentina. They're spying on us. They're
Well, I'm
satelliting
just,
us.
there are general cards about Latin America that are recent, and I'd like to look into. That's
Oh,
what-
yeah,
I saw
yeah,
you
yeah.
group the Argentina, Peru, Venezuela, that sort of stuff. That's what I want to look into, and I think you're probably right that it will suffer from the uniqueness.
Yeah.
But I think, the couple cards I found made me want to look more into it than just say it's totally not a thing.
I'm not saying not a thing. I think just that China gets to that core question.
What do you mean China gets picked up?
Increasing cooperation with China means we're cooperating with Latin America because China is the one who owns the space base that exists in Argentina.
The Japan just said doesn't leak because my China app actually
The
happened
space-
in
the
Buenos Aires.
space station in Argentina is owned by China.
So if we cooperate with them on global warming, that means that we have hurt their influence in Argentina? Well, that's what I'm saying. I don't know how that
background
access
is
is
like China just cheats and lies.
Yeah, it just resolves the controversy, right? Like,
Cards on that.
controversy is like, how do we check China's influence in Latin America? Or we just go to China like, hey, we're friends, we can cooperate in Latin America, right? It resolves the controversy area. We'll learn about that. Or not.
I could be wrong.
But, yeah.
Disagree.
I guess I also kind of want to know, like, we keep describing there's no linked uniqueness, but
Yeah.
like, what are the DAs we're talking about? Like, linked uniqueness, yeah, the app's always gonna find something to make a linked uniqueness argument. I guess, it's pretty obvious with Iran, we're not doing anything. So if we suddenly cooperate with them, we're gonna have lots of unique disadvantages. The link will be big. But I guess I don't, like, we have not at any point described what we think the dissents are for the various countries and things like that. Like, that would be something that would be useful to have kind of an inventory of for tomorrow, because there wasn't one.
Okay, well, I think we're saying the same thing. I could just replace all things with link uniqueness with, what is the
DA.
unique DA?
The disad for Australia is the China disad. It's not super great because we have a ton of military co-op now. It could be good, I mean, it could be a thing.
Yeah.
But there's this article that's like, but if we didn't have the Wolf Amendment, then we would be able to cooperate with China, and that's where Australia wants a bunch of the cooperation to happen. So those are two different issues. My thought was just like, that resolves the crux of literature there. There is a dissent there if we want to make it a thing.
Like encirclement, when you say the China, like China doesn't like that we're.
Yeah, like China doesn't want to be deterred and stuff.
For UAE, we need a solvency advocate from after March when they said that they're making the Pan-Arab space program. And they want to not cooperate with the US.
For Africa, I just think we need a US one.
Yeah, if we find solvency, that'd be nice. We'll see.
What were you looking for in Iran that you couldn't find?
More recent solvency advocates.
I'm of the opinion that there is literally only one article about an app, and the other articles don't assume. I disagree that the Iran says yes cards are that good. I think they're kind of just fronting, posturing. I don't think they necessarily follow through on some of those things, some of them in the context of international forums, not Trump offers it to them, that sort of thing. So solvency advocates that are that assume Trump, that assume breakdown of the JCPOA, that say both countries would actually do it for real.
I might work on the militarization version of the resolution. It's not the increased militarization version.
Decrease.
Yeah, decrease.
We'll work on it.
Yeah, you work on increase, I'll work on decrease.
I'll make it about cooperation.
Yeah.
Don't worry.
We can increase hybridization with India. Maybe we both be on the ballot. Then democracy.
Of course, just they would split probably.
That's
They
right,
can't
George,
split.
Okay.
Yeah. They sort of can. Yeah.
Would anyone like to help Nick? I mean, I looked for the reduced barrier stuff of other people as well.
Referenced in the cards I was cutting,
Yeah.
but I didn't see any really by name except
I guess
for the one
just
that
the
I
question
presented.
really is like, is it just a China topic or are there other topics?
Well, it's
Definitely a
definitely not
Russia-
just a China
Yeah,
topic.
there's definitely other components. I'm just not sure how
ITARs.
deep the
Yeah.
Russia area is there.
The question is, does it need to be country limited or not? Because like ITAR is a thing.
Oh,
There's lots of things.
so probably.
Maybe.
Well, could we maybe have like a 5-minute spiel on this from you so that based on the various countries we can incorporate that? I don't know how many people have looked at it. I've looked at it.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I cut these cards a couple weeks ago, but I think reducing our legal barriers to cooperation is a good starting point for a lot of these discussions because like ITAR, which is international arms trafficking and things like that, are regulations on the amount of cooperation we could do with countries over things like rockets, technology, things like that are wedded to domestic law already, which means that there's definitely unique links to changing those laws that have been on the books for a while. I think the Wolf Amendment is obviously a topical aft that is that's a domestic barrier to it. I looked into restrictions, but all the literature doesn't really use the term restriction. It's all like these are the largest barriers to cooperation. So I like the word barriers more so than a lot of other words. I think that the UN article that Maggie set out earlier, the last three things of its cooperation was like export controls, was like technology transfers and things like that, all of which indicates that it would be an increase in cooperation. I think that there are some T cards that were in some of the other documents that talk about why reducing barriers is the first step towards cooperation, or at least aligning us with forms of cooperation. So I think that it meets T international in that regard, if that's a concern from some people. But if there are concerns about a reduced domestic barriers topic, I'd love to know what those are so I can kind of come up with answers to.
Now that we have the country list, particularly, I feel like I have a good understanding of what China apps look like on that, a good understanding of how Russia and India, and maybe one or two of the maybes would fit into that.
Try to figure out how other countries fit into that would be a good step. Yeah.
That would be a good start for me.
This seems to be like the AF basically gets to get all the free market stuff. Because you're basically like, hey, now SpaceX can sell their technology to X, Y, and Z, which we had said was negative ground, although we have blank, what's the distance?
I mean, the distance are like arms.
No, I'm just saying, like, that-
tech
that is
diffusion,
something that
those
we
same
need-
things that you would get China distance.
That's the one thing that we need to kind of consider. So
It
I'm sure that
flips
will
what we
be-
currently think is neg
Right,
ground to
well,
F
that's-
ground, and yes.
If you want to, I imagine that would going to be a.
And then
Objection.
did the resolution stop there? Or wasn't it reduced barriers and then?
Yeah, reduce barriers. The United States should significantly reduce barriers to international space cooperation. Is I think the stem that I ended up having. Whatever tail end we end up with space cooperation, I think is what space policy, something along those lines.
So something that modifies barriers or a barrier card that wasn't attitudinal. Because a major barrier is Trump doesn't like other countries.
Legal probably is a good one.
And I think more specifics on what types of tech other countries want or that we want to share with other countries that we can't. Whether it's particular imaging technology or communication stuff or what because that's like second generation AF advantages / EAs.
What else needs to go on the to-do list?
Lisa, does number 2 include international agreements that we already are a party to?
Sure. That's a check.
Yeah, I guess there's no norms or international agreements. Like,
That's what I was trying to think of, for the,
Yeah.
to make a narrow version,
or ones we are a
limited
party to.
version of the norms topic, it needs to be working through something that exists now.
Maybe ones we aren't a party to even.
Right,
Yeah,
sure. Gotta be some.
I can look into that too.
Because despite it being the first thing we did, I'm not comfortable with increase international space cooperation and it will stop unless it was just China. But then we moved on when I wanted to go a little deeper on.
No, we've got some direct object and some indirect object. I'm a little concerned.
And to me, it raises the question of number 6 down the bottom. What is the coordinate value we want?
Yeah.
Because none of those definitions of anything means the neg is guaranteed. And I know it's not 1997, we're going to guarantee a DA across the board with all of these countries, but it would be nice if there was
something.
Yeah, I mean, the two most recent. I know, I remember that topic.
There's good area.
I was talking about Title VII. Also not a DA.
I'm just thinking we haven't talked about it, but the most recent US legislation about space was the Free Enterprise Act, right? The Ted Cruz thing. Right. It's totally deals with Article 6 obligations of the Outer Space Treaty. It's international space cooperation, unilateral versus multilateral. We're trying to find some generic negative ground.
Are you pro Ted Cruz though?
No, but that area of you seem to be grasping to trying to figure out what the predictable ground is going to be. And why not use pieces of legislation or actual agreements, things that are on the books as what to grasp onto. So
at least the literature when it discusses it is like, wow.
Yeah.
What was it called?
What, the American Space Commerce Free Enterprise Act? Yeah, that's what it's called. HR 2809.
And yeah, I'm not gonna do all of number 2.
Sure.
I'm gonna do the international agreements, the norms, second.
Other people?
If we're doing just China.
Yeah.
Is there more literature that's not exploring the human space flight range of things? 'Cause that was a big focus of this hot paper. So I don't know if getting human space flight is a reason why we should do just China or something. I don't know.
Or add more countries to the list. Make it larger, but a smaller outfit.
Yeah.
There's also cyber was a big part of the topic we were very at that point today. Cyber as the collective, I think, notion that no one wants to debate it.
I think that's actually another big China exclusive thing, right?
Yeah, we just haven't had a discussion.
Yeah.
And it was a
We
very,
just kind of
a very
shrugged and
large
moved on.
part of the
What,
topic paper. I don't know, I didn't know.
So like cybersecurity in outer space,
That's
not
what I mean.
cyberspace.
Yeah.
First, I feel like it's been a long day and I'd like to digest everything that's out there.
Yep.
And have all of this in my mind going forward for discussions tomorrow, but maybe not take on a full assignment.
Understood. Same. Bye.
work on number 2. Me too.
Yeah, that's what I'm working on. Bless you.
I can work.
Now you're fussing.
I can work on Russia if
You put
unless
that
there's a
up before.
rush for it, like help with more Russia.
Yeah.
I would like Russia to do
Just
Can you also do the Russia barriers?
I know.
Can you do the Russia barriers work? Since I'm doing barriers.
I mean, that's one of the things I've looked for.
Yeah.
That's,
The rocket
Yeah.
stuff is the main problem.
Yeah.
Tons
Oh,
of it.
rockets.
And it's
yeah.
like all breaking today too.
How
yeah.
hard is it to pick? I feel like this has been floating just above the surface.
Okay.
Okay, dude.
I think once we've determined the activities and the countries, it will be much easier.
What?
Like, it's hard to say where in space without deciding what activities we're doing.
Yeah.
Yeah, some may
just-
not even need it because by the activity.
I have no idea.
I don't know.
Remote sensing.
That's all I
Yeah, on the ground.
That didn't even
Well, that just has
get
to limit
limited.
the space
Beyond the
for
Earth's
Okay.
Mesosphere on that topic did not stop me from winning a ton of debates with Running Landsat, which looked back at the Earth.
I think the bigger issue is no one wants to debate the, like, this space or, like,
We're
US.
debating that no matter what.
I think
The reason why Beyond the Earth's Mesosphere got added midway through the summer on that topic was because people had started writing apps at camp that were like, explore the space in my closet, explore the space
Yeah.
in the Grand Canyon. Beyond the Earth's Mesosphere limited that out, but it did not stop the looking back at the Earth apps. I'm not sure what you need to do in order if you want to stop. There's also some of those may be okay or don't have that much advantage beyond the status quo. That makes them a big threat. I don't know.
I'm not saying we need to add any limiter, but there are different levels of the orbit, and the lower couple deal with satellites and things that people are afraid of, data and the climate apps that everyone's afraid that there's no distance to. If you go further,
The controversy is cooperation with other countries, you know? I mean, like, you get your dissets, you get your code dissets.
that's fair. I'm just saying you could. It's about going to the moon, Mars, the robots. You know, you can get those listing.
I
all
think the only
potentially.
way
That's one, but I'm fine with not
If-
putting it.
if for the China resolution, we kind of leave the activities open and are just like, you can do a lot, but it's got to be with China. That's the only one that I think might. We don't limit the types of things you do with China. We just limit it to one country. It might be worth putting a little bit of a restriction on where you can do it. Just like,
I know that there's nothing definite, but just given how much other work went into this, people see themselves possibly voting for a China-only topic.
I do.
I think
I
it would be
really
worthwhile.
like
I
it.
just want to make sure.
Brian, did you want to version with something that is further out than beyond the Earth's mesosphere? Is that what I heard you say?
No, I just wanted it to say something that says outside of the Earth.
Okay.
Put Klarman on that. He can research
Yeah,
that.
great. Sounds like there's something.
You can just control that. Extraterrestrial.
Sure.
Anybody want to include some of these in the needs more research area?
I can happily tell you if UAE has a solvency advocate tonight. Just give me an hour and I'll tell you if UAE has a solvency advocate. I can also take another one of those if you want. I don't really care.
Anyone else?
Dude, Klarman, what's the dissat?
I mean, we have it.
Wipe
we have
out.
too much China stuff. Like, I cut one card on the China PA, that's some more. I'm, like, I guess we don't have enough. If you want more cards on it, it was formatted kind of weirdly, I guess.
It's weird that we were blazing through it. I didn't read through.
How about this? I began a document this morning that kind of had a template of background stuff that I don't think is ready for public consumption. But if people who did their reports could email me a list of the dissets so that I don't have to go back through every one of your documents,
dissent you think would apply to the country or countries you were working on. I will try to figure that into the larger matrix and have that organized in some sort of useful fashion.
Good? All right. That was good. 9 a.m.
Yeah.
I'll have coffee and pastries again, or as well. Okay. We'll do a little later than that.
They don't post this event tickets.
Oh, yeah. Clean up,
Thank you.
clean up your trash.
Wait, so
Did you
Adrian,
ever sit up?
Yeah.
Adrian,